Have you ever wondered how someone could endure suffering so intense that it defies all comprehension? Imagine losing everything you have, your wealth, your family, even your health, and still maintaining unwavering faith. Welcome to a story that challenges the limits of human endurance and reveals the true essence of hope amidst adversity. Today, we will delve into the life of a man whose suffering was beyond words, but whose story resonates through the centuries, inspiring us to find light even in the darkest hours. Get ready to meet Job and his journey of pain, faith, and redemption. I am Job, a man who lived in the land of Uz, blessed with a life of abundance and happiness. I was known for my great wealth, my large family, and, above all, my deep devotion to God. My story does not begin with suffering, but with prosperity and blessings. I owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yokes of oxen, and 500 donkeys. In addition, I had many servants who helped me take care of my possessions. My life was full of comfort and security. My family was large and close-knit. I had 7 sons and 3 daughters, and they were my greatest joy. My sons frequently held feasts in their homes and always invited their sisters to join. It was a great satisfaction to see my family united, celebrating and sharing happy moments together. I cared deeply about my children's spiritual well-being. Whenever a cycle of feasting ended, I would get up early and offer sacrifices on their behalf, thinking, perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. I did this regularly because I wanted to ensure that my family remained pure and dedicated to God. My devotion to God was known to all. I was considered a man of integrity and righteousness, who feared God and shunned evil. My faith was not just a ritualistic practice but an essential part of my daily life. I lived according to divine principles and always sought to act with justice and kindness. My actions reflected my belief that serving God was the most important thing, and I did so with all my heart. My life, before the tragedies, was an example of how devotion and righteousness could bring prosperity and peace. I had everything a man could wish for: wealth, a loving family, and a deep spiritual connection with God. However, my story is a reminder that even those who are righteous and pious can face immense challenges. My life changed drastically, and the trials I faced tested my faith in ways I could never have imagined. But before those storms came, my life was a testament to the goodness and justice of God and the peace that comes from living a life dedicated to divine service. That was the life I knew and loved, the life I lost, but which also prepared me for the journey of suffering and redemption that was to come. It all began on a day that seemed like any other. I was at home, taking care of my daily chores, when suddenly a messenger came running to me, with a pale face and labored breath. He could barely speak, but the words that came out of his mouth were like a direct blow to my heart. "The oxen were plowing, and the donkeys were grazing nearby," he said. "Suddenly, the Sabaeans attacked and took all the animals, killing the servants with the sword. I am the only one who escaped to tell you this." Before I could fully absorb this terrible news, another messenger arrived running. His expression was of pure terror. "Fire from God fell from heaven," he shouted, "and burned the sheep and the servants, consuming everything. I am the only one who escaped to tell you this." The ground seemed to open beneath my feet. Everything I had built, all my possessions, were being destroyed in the blink of an eye. But the avalanche of bad news did not stop there. While the second messenger was still speaking, a third arrived, bringing more calamity. "The Chaldeans formed 3 bands and attacked your camels," he reported. "They took the animals and killed the servants with the sword. I am the only one who escaped to tell you this." My mind was in turmoil. How could I be losing everything so quickly and devastatingly? And then, the worst news of all. A fourth messenger arrived, and his face showed a pain I could not imagine. "Your sons and daughters were feasting at the eldest brother's house," he began. Suddenly, a mighty wind came from the desert and struck the house. It collapsed on them, killing them all. I am the only one who escaped to tell you this. At that moment, the reality of my loss hit me with full force. It was not just my possessions and servants that had been taken from me, but my own children. My descendants, my joy, my hope for the future, everything was destroyed. In a state of utter despair, I tore my robes and shaved my head, symbols of deep mourning and pain. I fell to the ground in worship and said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away, blessed be the name of the Lord." Even in the face of such complete devastation, I maintained my faith, recognizing God's sovereignty over all things. These initial tragedies were a severe test of my faith and resilience. In a short period, I lost all my material wealth, my loyal servants, and, most painfully, my beloved children. The magnitude of my loss was unimaginable, and I found myself plunged into a deep darkness. Yet, even amid this storm of suffering, I clung to my belief that God had a purpose, though hidden from me at that moment. My suffering was only beginning, and I had no idea that my faith would be tested in even more extreme ways. The news of my children's death was like a blade piercing my heart. Those who were my greatest joy, my hope, and pride had been taken from me abruptly and cruelly. Receiving this information was like being struck by a devastating blow, a pain that transcends any description. My 7 sons and 3 daughters, all gathered in the eldest brother's house, celebrating together as they often did, were engulfed by an unimaginable tragedy. A mighty wind, coming from the desert, caused the house to collapse on them, killing them instantly. The image of this brutal destruction and the fact that none of them survived was an unbearable weight on my soul. At the moment the messenger brought me this news, I felt as if the world around me was collapsing. My heart was torn apart, my mind stunned. How could I continue living without them, without the joy of their laughter, without the comfort of their presence? The loss of a child is an unparalleled pain, but losing all of them at once was something beyond human comprehension. The feeling of emptiness and despair was overwhelming. My children were my light, and with their departure, I was cast into a deep and endless darkness. At that moment, despair took hold of me. I tore my clothes in a gesture of deep mourning, shaved my head as a sign of my anguish and prostration. I fell to the ground in worship, not because my faith was intact, but because, at the height of my pain, there was nothing else to hold on to but God. I cried out, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away, blessed be the name of the Lord." These words did not come from a place of easy acceptance, but from an abyss of pain where the only way out was to acknowledge divine sovereignty. Emotionally, I was shattered. The pain of loss was a constant, a dark presence that accompanied me at all times. Every memory of my children, every thought about their now stolen futures, was like knives repeatedly slashing my heart. My days were filled with mourning that seemed endless, and my nights with a void that no sleep could fill. The house that was once full of life and laughter was now immersed in sepulchral silence, a constant reminder of their absence. I repeatedly asked myself why. Why had God allowed such a tragedy? What had I done to deserve such severe punishment? My prayers turned into desperate pleas for answers, but the heavens remained silent. The feeling of abandonment was overwhelming. Friends and acquaintances tried to offer consolation, but their words often sounded empty and insensitive, incapable of touching the depth of my pain. They could not understand the magnitude of my loss, and their attempts at explanation or comfort often only increased my anguish. Even in the face of such tragedy, a small flame of faith still burned within me, though flickering and fragile. I clung to the hope that somehow God had a greater purpose that I could not understand at that moment. But this hope was often suffocated by the crushing weight of pain and grief. The death of my children was not just a personal loss, it was an immense test of my faith and emotional resilience. In the midst of this storm of pain, I learned to live with suffering, to navigate the turbulent sea of loss and sadness. Every day was a battle to find the strength to continue, to maintain my faith despite the darkness that surrounded me. The story of my children's death is one of deep pain, but also of an incessant struggle to find meaning and hope amidst the chaos. It is a reminder that even in the most desperate situations, faith can be an anchor, albeit fragile, in a sea of despair. After the devastation that took over my life, with the loss of my possessions and, more painfully, of my children, I thought the depth of my suffering had reached its peak. However, my ordeal was far from over. In a new cruel blow, I was afflicted with painful sores that covered my entire body, from the soles of my feet to the top of my head. These sores were not just a superficial inconvenience, but deep, inflamed wounds that caused excruciating pain, making every movement a torment. The physical suffering was relentless. The pain from the sores was unbearable, and there was no relief. I sat on a pile of ashes, scraping the sores with a shard of pottery in a desperate attempt to find some relief, even if temporary. My skin was covered with ulcers that itched and burned, and the infection spread, emitting a repulsive odor. My body, which had once been healthy and strong, was now a continuous source of agony and humiliation. The physical deterioration was not only a blow to my body but also to my soul. The incessant suffering began to erode my mental and spiritual resilience. The constant pain kept me from sleeping and eating, and my appearance transformed into something unrecognizable. Looking in the mirror was a cruel reminder of my abrupt fall from grace. Where there had once been a respectable and healthy man, there was now only a shadow mutilated by disease and suffering. My wife, seeing my condition, was desperate and anguished. She said to me, "Do you still maintain your integrity? Curse God and die." Her words were a reflection of the despair she also felt, but I replied, "You speak as one of the foolish women speaks. Shall we accept good from God, and not trouble?" My words came from a place of pain, but also from a desperate attempt to maintain my faith and integrity despite everything. The impact of these sores on my faith was profound. I had always believed that my devotion and integrity would protect me from the most severe calamities, but now, even as a righteous man, I was drowning in suffering. My conversations with God became more desperate, filled with questions and laments. Why was God allowing me to suffer so much? What had I done to deserve such affliction? The faith that had once been my strength was now being tested in ways I had never imagined. The presence of my friends, who initially came to console me, began to become an additional source of suffering. Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, instead of offering solace, started to insinuate that my suffering was the result of some hidden sin. Their words hurt almost as much as the sores on my body. They argued that God is just and that such calamities could only be a punishment for something I had done. These accusations were not only unjust but also undermined the little strength I still had to face my pain. These sores put me in a state of complete isolation. I had once been a respected and loved man, but now I was avoided, feared, and despised. The loneliness of physical suffering and the feeling of being abandoned by God and men were almost unbearable. I cried out to God with all my soul, seeking an answer, relief, any sign that He was still with me. But silence was the only response I received. In the midst of this darkness, I clung to my faith with the little strength I had left. My integrity and my devotion to God were my anchors, even when everything seemed lost. Although my body was in a pitiful state and my mind tormented by pain, I continued to believe that God had a purpose, even if I could not understand it at that moment. The assault on my health was a final test of my endurance and faith. I was pushed to the limit of human suffering, both physically and spiritually. The pain from the sores was a constant reminder of my fragility and mortality, but also an opportunity to demonstrate unshakable faith amid the most extreme adversities. My story, marked by these painful sores, is a testament that even in the depths of suffering, faith can be a light guiding through the densest darkness. My wife's reaction to the calamities that befell us was a distressing portrait of the despair that enveloped our situation. She, like me, was confronted with the overwhelming loss of our possessions and, even more painfully, the death of our children. Faced with this desolate scenario, her initial reaction was marked by a mixture of shock, sadness, and despair. At the peak of our suffering, when I was struggling to understand why such affliction had befallen us, my wife, taken by pain and anguish, addressed me with words that echoed through my soul. "Do you still maintain your integrity? Curse God and die," she said, in a moment of almost palpable despair. These words, though coming from a place of deep suffering, echoed in my mind as a reflection of the despair we felt. It was as if the very foundation of our faith and belief was being tested to its limits. My wife's suggestion that I curse God was a reflection of the intensity of the suffering we were facing, a desperate attempt to find a way out of the darkness that surrounded us. However, amidst the whirlwind of emotions and doubts, my response was a silent affirmation of the faith that still burned within me. "You speak as one of the foolish women speaks," I said to her. "Shall we accept good from God, and not trouble?" My words, though laden with pain and anguish, were a declaration that, despite everything, I still maintained my faith and integrity, even in the face of the most severe trials. My wife's reaction, though understandable given the circumstances, was a painful reminder of the struggles we faced not only against external adversities but also against the internal temptations of despair and disbelief. Yet, even in the deepest despair, my faith remained an anchor, a light that shone through the darkness, guiding me through the most violent storms. The journey of suffering we faced together was a testament not only to our physical endurance but also to our spiritual strength. Despite the words of despair and the temptations to give up, we kept our faith firmly rooted, believing that even in seemingly senseless suffering, God was still with us, guiding us through the darkness towards the light. Job's friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, played a significant role during my period of affliction. They came to me in my pain, initially seeking to offer consolation and comfort in the face of the calamities that had so brutally struck me. However, what began as an attempt at solidarity quickly turned into a series of debates and discussions about the cause of my suffering. Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar were men who shared my faith and belief in God, and their intentions in coming to visit me were undoubtedly noble. However, as the conversations unfolded, it became evident that their perceptions of the nature of suffering and God's role were different from mine. While they tried to find logical and spiritual explanations for the tragedies that had befallen me, I found myself increasingly isolated in my understanding of what was happening. Eliphaz, the eldest and most experienced among them, was the first to try to find an explanation for my suffering. He argued that suffering was the result of sin and disobedience to God, suggesting that I should search my heart for any transgressions that might have triggered these calamities. His words, though well-intentioned, were like arrows that pierced my heart already torn by pain. Bildad, in turn, sought to ground his advice in an understanding of divine justice. He argued that God is just and that, therefore, suffering could only be a punishment for some fault committed by me. His approach was more direct, placing the responsibility for my suffering directly on my shoulders. His words were like daggers that pierced my soul, increasing my anguish even more. Zophar, the youngest and most impetuous of the three, contributed to the debate with his own view on the matter. He argued that suffering was an inevitable consequence of sin and that, therefore, it was my duty to seek God's forgiveness to find relief. His approach was simplistic, ignoring the complexity of my situation and adding more fuel to the fire of the discussions. As the conversations progressed, it became clear to me that my friends were seeking simplistic answers to complex questions. Their attempts at consolation, though well-intentioned, only served to increase my sense of isolation and helplessness. Their words, instead of bringing comfort, only increased my pain and confusion, leaving me even further from finding a solution to my suffering. In the end, the visits of my friends, although made with the best intentions, ended up being an additional source of anguish and suffering. Their attempts to find simplistic explanations for what was happening only served to further distance me from a true understanding of the purpose behind my afflictions. Instead of consolation, their words brought only more pain, leaving me even more alone in my suffering. The dialogues between me and my friends during the period of my affliction were marked by intense philosophical and theological discussions about the nature of divine justice and the meaning of human suffering. As we together faced the depths of my pain, our conversations turned into a stage for deep and sometimes conflicting exploration of fundamental questions about the nature of God and suffering. I, who was at the center of the hurricane of affliction, struggled to understand the purpose behind the tragedies that had befallen me. My faith in God remained, but was being tested to the limit as I questioned why a just God would allow such pain and suffering to come upon a righteous man like myself. My quest for answers led me to confront my friends with difficult questions and challenge their perceptions about the nature of God and human suffering. On the other hand, my friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, sought to find explanations for my suffering within their own theological and philosophical frameworks. Their attempts at consolation turned into debates about the relationship between sin and suffering, divine justice, and the nature of man. Their views on these issues often clashed with mine, leading to heated discussions and emotional confrontations. Eliphaz, the oldest and most experienced among them, was most inclined to view my suffering as divine punishment for sin. He argued that God is just and that suffering could only be explained as a result of some transgression committed by me. His words, though spoken with an aura of authority and wisdom, were like arrows piercing my heart, further increasing my anguish. Bildad, on the other hand, sought to ground his views on suffering in divine justice. He argued that God is just and that suffering could only be understood as a manifestation of divine justice. His words, though spoken with a tone of confidence and conviction, were like daggers piercing my soul, further increasing my confusion and despair. Zophar, the youngest and most impetuous among them, contributed to the discussions with his own views on suffering and divine justice. He argued that suffering was an inevitable consequence of sin and that, therefore, it was my duty to seek God's forgiveness to find relief. His words, though spoken with youthful energy and fervor, were like flames burning my soul, further increasing my sense of helplessness and despair. As the dialogues progressed, it became clear to me that, despite the good intentions of my friends, we were drifting further and further from a true understanding of the purpose behind my afflictions. Our discussions, though deep and intense, only served to increase my sense of isolation and helplessness, leaving me even further from finding a solution to my suffering. Amidst the whirlwind of emotions and theological conflicts, I continued to seek answers, clinging to my faith as an anchor in the storm, hoping to find some light at the end of the tunnel of my affliction. The cry of my soul to God during the darkest days of my affliction was a reflection of my desperate search for answers and understanding in the face of overwhelming suffering that afflicted me. As I found myself immersed in a sea of pain and anguish, my prayers became a cry of agony and despair, an attempt to find some solace or understanding amidst the whirlwind of emotions that consumed me. I found myself confronting God with difficult and challenging questions, questioning the purpose behind the tragedies that had befallen me. Why, O just God, would you allow such pain and suffering to come upon a faithful servant like me? What did I do to deserve such affliction? These questions echoed in my mind like an echo of my own anguish, as I desperately sought some sign of answer. My conversations with God became a battlefield of the Spirit, where I struggled to reconcile my faith with the brutal reality of my suffering. I clung to God's promises, seeking solace in His words of comfort and hope. However, my faith was being tested to the limit as I struggled to understand why a loving God would allow such pain to come upon His faithful servant. I found myself pleading with God for relief, crying out for a divine intervention that could free me from the unbearable burden of my suffering. My pleas were like a cry of agony, an expression of the pain and despair that consumed my soul. However, the heavens remained silent, and my prayers seemed to echo in the void, unanswered or comforted. Despite the apparent lack of response, I continued to cry out to God with all my soul, seeking an answer, a sign of hope amidst the darkness. My faith, though shaken, remained firm, and I refused to give up hope of finding some meaning or purpose behind my afflictions. My conversations with God became a refuge in the storm, a place where I could freely express my deepest doubts and fears. Despite my anguish, I knew that God was with me, even when the answers seemed beyond my reach. My journey of faith and suffering led me to a place of deep surrender, where I learned to trust in God's plan, even when I could not fully understand it. The cry of my soul to God was an expression of my ongoing search for meaning and purpose amidst human suffering. My prayers were a testimony of my unwavering faith, a light that shone even in the darkest depths of my affliction. And although the answers were still beyond my reach, I continued to cry out to God with all my soul, trusting that He was with me, even in the depths of my suffering. God's response to my desperate search for understanding came in a way I could never have imagined. As I was immersed in a sea of doubts and questions, He revealed Himself to me through a whirlwind, a powerful manifestation of His divine presence that left me stunned and amazed. In the face of the grandeur and majesty of the whirlwind, I was confronted with the voice of God, questioning me in a way that echoed through my soul. "Who is this that darkens my counsel with words without knowledge?" He asked, challenging me to confront the limitation of my understanding before the divine mystery. In the imposing presence of God, I was humbled and silenced, realizing my own smallness and insignificance before the grandeur and majesty of the Creator. His words, though spoken with an authority and power that left me trembling with fear, were at the same time an expression of His love and care for me, His faithful servant. God continued to question me, challenging me to consider the vastness and complexity of His power and wisdom. He took me on a journey through creation, showing me the greatness of the heavens and the earth, the mysteries of the sea and the heavens, and the wonder of the life that pulses through all creation. In the face of this overwhelming vision of divine grandeur, I was confronted with the limitation of my own understanding and the smallness of my questions. I realized that, while I could seek to understand God's designs, there were mysteries that were beyond my human understanding, mysteries that could only be understood through faith and trust in the divine plan. In the end, God taught me a profound lesson about the nature of His grandeur and mystery. He showed me that, while I may never fully understand His designs, I could trust that He was in control, working all things for the good of those who love Him. The response of God to my quest for understanding was a powerful revelation of His majesty and grandeur. It humbled me, silenced me, and filled me with reverence and awe in the face of the divine mystery. And although I may never fully understand the ways of God, I can trust that He is in control, guiding me with love and wisdom through the storms of life. In this emotional journey through Job's life and suffering, we witness not only the depths of human pain but also the strength of faith and the goodness of God that prevail in the end. Job's story reminds us that even in the darkest moments, there is hope and restoration beyond the suffering. If you were moved by this powerful narrative, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring content like this. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your participation is crucial for us to continue bringing stories that touch the heart and inspire the soul. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.